third session. There's just a few more people to come on in. Thank you very much. There we are, Yan. Hello, Yan Ling from Singapore. Welcome. Innovation and digital technology. Don't you love it? Okay, thanks everyone. Hi, thanks for joining us for this third session of the Innovation Room here at Shift. This next session, I promised some interesting things. We started with rule makers. Wrecked my own joke. Started with the rule makers. We went into data and how we can make better decisions with data. Hi, Kim, welcome back. And now for the rule breakers. It's a discussion between David Engwicht and Chris Gill, who'll talk about how Soul was brought back to Gertrude Street and the Business Boosters program. Chris will join us in a minute, but we'll kick off with David, who, if you're like me, been around a little while. He doesn't need any introduction really to placemakers or economic developers. David really is a stalwart of our profession. In fact, he's the person that we all turn to for his opinion. I first had the pleasure of meeting David at a conference in Auckland in 2007. It was Main Streets back then, before placemaking was, I guess, placemaking as it's known now. It's many presentations, books, and inspired people later that he joins us. But again, this is over to you, David.
Okay, great. Thanks a lot. Very early in my career, well, I didn't even have a career at this stage. I was in Paris and I was walking down this little street, and I saw a cafe where, for the first time in my life, I saw chairs lined up in a straight line rather than grouped around the tables. And they looked like seats in a theatre, and I'd never seen this before. And it always fascinates me as to why any arrangement of space is made the way it is. It's never by accident. There's a reason for it. So I sat down on one of the seats, bought a coffee, and I started thinking about why are these seats arranged like the seats in a theatre rather than grouped around the table like we would have in Australia. And I had this breakthrough moment, which was, I thought, what the people are really doing here is, what is the drama that's going on? Why is this like a theatre? Now, these people are sitting here looking at the people walking past, and they're looking at the way the person's walking, the way they're dressed, who they're with, etc. And they're making up stories in their brain about these people. And it was at that moment I had this breakthrough concept that what cities and towns are all about, and I created a definition for it, which was that cities are an invention to maximize exchange and minimize the travel that we need to do to access that exchange. And that exchange can be an exchange of goods, can equally be an exchange of friendship, or in the case of the people sitting on those seats looking at the people walking past, those people walking past provoke emotions and feelings in the brain of the person sitting there, and that person is making up stories about that person. And so there's an unseen exchange that's going on in that case. And immediately I could see that there were two types of exchanges that happen in cities and towns. The first is a planned exchange. So I watched people walking past that cafe. They may have been on the way to the bank to get a bank loan, and that's a planned exchange. Now, interestingly, what city authorities and government authorities do is they plan for planned exchanges. In other words, their total focus is how do we get people from point A to point B to transact some kind of an exchange at the end of that journey. What they don't understand is that when people are on a journey for a planned exchange, they have hundreds of spontaneous exchanges along the way, unplanned exchanges. So they might bump into a friend they haven't seen for 2 years. Now, the economic life of cities revolves entirely around spontaneous exchanges. That's why all the retailers want to be on a main street, because even if somebody plans to come there to, buy a loaf of bread or something, chances are that person first discovered that bread shop accidentally or spontaneously. And so I would argue that the vibrancy of our public spaces depends on the health of the spontaneous exchange realm. In other words, the number of exchanges that are happening in a spontaneous or unplanned fashion. Now, by definition, that means you've got to have chaos in your public spaces to allow for those spontaneous exchanges to take place. Now, what is happening? Yep, sorry.
If that's okay, I think you've said some key words for me there. Spontaneous, health, public spaces, and bringing funky back. We've got Chris on the line now. He's wearing a mask. If there we go. He's wearing a mask. If anyone can not see him, click on your arrows left and right, and there he is. So if that's okay at that point, David, I'm going to introduce Chris back into your conversation. Between you can continue that. So Chris is the owner and operator, and I believe the bringer of the funk back to Northside Records at 236 Gertrude Street, Fitzroy. So Chris and David are joining us from Melbourne, if you hadn't guessed already. Hello, Chris.
I'm joining you from Brisbane.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, he's in Brisbane. I'm in Melbourne, hence the, the funk appendage. Yeah, my name's Chris and I run a record store. I've been running it for like 18 years. And as you can tell, I love my job. To me, it's not a job. To me, it's a platform. And to me, it's like David was saying, utilizing spontaneity whenever possible. I've run this store and the whole point of running this store was to grow soul music in Melbourne. And in 18 years ago, we had like 1 or 2 bands in store and in town, and now we'd have possibly sort of 50 or 60. 2 of them, or 1 of them, the Hiatus Coyote, have been Grammy nominated, and we've really grown as to be sort of one of the premier sort of soul music makers in the world, actually. So I think it's worked well. One of the things I like try and do in the store is promote local soul music, and of course, music from all around the world. You can see up here, there's the posters of all the in-stores that we've had, like Sampa the Great, Flying Lotus, George Clinton from Parliament, Funkadelic, and many more adorn the walls. And of course, I'd like to point out my disco football. So it's not sort of by accident that it's been a church of funk here, I've got to say. I find that the in-stores that we have been pretty sort of instrumental in bringing together people and music and helping to grow the music. And I think it's very important that what we do with these in-stores is we try and create a safe space for people, all sorts of people too. And it's not just sort of aimed at hipsters by all means, like we want old people to come, and we especially want young people to come, and especially under 18 people. So one of the other things that we sort of like to focus on is trying to separate music from drugs, specifically alcohol, so that we try to make it a very safe and encouraging environment for all people across the board to come on in and get down and be a part of it, and to feel like, they're wanted, and it's like, it's a fun place. It's a fun place.
And a beautiful tie back in, Chris. Thank you for the tour of the shop. We should record that and pop that on a Google map, I think, for you at some stage. But brilliant, thank you. The chaos, we promised you chaos, but that was a beautiful tie-in back to what David was talking about in terms of Paris and orderly streets, and then into chaos on a Melbourne street. David, would you like to continue that?
I think about something there that Chris said, which I think is fundamentally important, which is the next bit that we come to. And that is that chaos has to have a container to happen within. And I actually talk about planning for good chaos, which cities and councils aren't very good at. So Chris mentioned that, for example, he has a rule about not associating drugs and alcohol with the events. Now, one of the things that we're saying to councils is we're not saying it's anarchy. We're not saying that there's no planning. What we're saying is you must have a container for that. And what we've evolved is what we call permission statements as an alternative to the old regulatory approach. So we say all the regulations of how you manage a street like the street that Chris is on should be thrown out the window and replaced with what we call a permission statement. And that's very, very short. In most cases, probably only 5 to 7 statements that are guidelines, like Chris's guideline of not having drugs and alcohol, but very, very clear things that the businesses can say where you where you say you can do whatever you like on your street as long as you abide by these 5 or 7 guidelines. And they're like the markers on a football field. They contain the field of play, but they don't restrict creativity of how people play the game. And we've pioneered this with in 2 ways. We do it with when we do 7-day makeovers. We sit down with the council and we negotiate what we call the what is allowed document, which in that case is a single A4 sheet. And with business boosters, where we're working with businesses and how they relate to their street, that is can usually fit on a DL size brochure, and it usually only has about 5 to 7 statements on it. So an example of a permission statement in a 7-day makeover might be something like, if it's movable, it's allowable. So we build humongous things, but we make sure that they can be moved with a forklift or a crane or whatever. And we say to council, we shouldn't need a building permit for something if it can be moved, if you don't like where it is or whatever. So that allows a whole lot of creativity where we're not going back to council and having to wait for clearances for stuff. Similarly with retailers, with the permission statement for businesses, a key one will be you must leave a continuous walkway of 1.8 metres width. Do away with all of this rubbish about you can't put stuff within a certain distance of the curb, and you mustn't put anything on your shop fronts and all of that. What are you trying to achieve? You're trying to achieve a continuous walkway of a certain width. So that's the permission statement. You can get as creative as you like as long as you've got a continuous walkway that connects with the walkway in front of the shop next door, which is of a certain width.
David's got a good point there. I think it's very important for councillors to be facilitators and not regulators.
Yep.
Now, just as an example, we're talking of some of the in-store parties we've had. The last one we had was, 3 weeks ago, just before the second lockdown in Melbourne, and we had, maximum of 15 people. And we made sure I got on the mic constantly and kept telling people to get 1.5 away from each other and, spread it out. And cops drove past a few times and they were cool. Similarly, back in March December last year, we had a party with Sampa the Great. She launched her album on my desk, like right there. And in the store, we fitted 120 people in the store. And then out the front of the store, on the street, we had another maybe 300 to 400 people. It was quite wild and quite loose. And similarly, the police drove past maybe about 4 or 5 times when I was standing out on the street, pushing people back in off the road, off the tram tracks. And they kept driving. They realized someone was like taking care of safety, and they kept driving. So I think common sense is very important, and it really is. It's kind of it's necessary for councils to let people party. You should not have to get a permit to shake your thing, ever. Back to you, David.
I know. I totally agree that it's why we say the only way that council knows how to control chaos is through regulations and permits, etc. Interestingly enough, to extend on that, where this all started for me is I was asked to look at the main street of Taree in New South Wales. Town had been bypassed with a highway bypass, and they had a huge vacancy rate, something like 70 to 80% of the shops were vacant. And so they called me in to see what they could do to revitalise their main street. And I asked them, how much are you collecting in fees from the cafes to be putting out their tables and chairs? And they said $9,700. And I said, why the hell are you charging cafes to help animate your town centre? You should be paying them $9,700. And then I said, why are you charging them for it? So one of the things that I got them to do, that's right, I said, how much is it costing you to collect the $9,700? And they didn't have a clue. They had to employ inspectors to go around and make sure people didn't have tables and chairs outside of their permitted area, etc., etc. So it leads to this whole convoluted exercise, whereas under the permissions framework that we pioneered there in Taree, they removed all charges, all need for permits, and just basically said, do what you like on the footpath as long as you leave this continuous walkway of 1.8 metres. So we've got to get away from this regulatory and permission and permits-based processes and go, what are we actually trying to accomplish? And what is the least amount, what's the smallest container that we can possibly create to contain that life and allow for the greatest creativity within it? Over to you, Chris.
Well, I would just sort of further reiterate the difference, I suppose, in, if you just have sort of like retail people who are just opening the shop door and then just waiting for people to come in. I think, ideally, you really want retail people who are sort of heavily invested in what they're selling. And that's a difficult thing to get that, though. So I think, like Gertrude Street, where I'm at here, is full of owner-operators. And I think owner-operators are quite a sweet treat for retail because they have the most invested and most involved in their own thing. So that's a bit of a dichotomy too. I mean, if you're trying to sort of activate the strips, you really need to have the retailers on the same page, on a page of that they're going to put in extra effort too. And I suppose if you're going to put in extra effort and then you're met with regulations from the council, it takes all the wind out of your sails and you don't put in any extra effort. So once again, councillors must be facilitators and not regulators. Yeah. Back to you, Dave.
Thank you.
And sorry, very quickly, if that's okay. We've got about 5 minutes left and a couple of questions have popped up. People would like to type those through or put your hand up and we can start asking those now if you'd like. Yes, business boosters have been speaking about a little there, Emma, but we welcome lots of questions. Deborah's posed a question, or a statement rather, which now that I've encouraged everyone to type, I'm going to lose. This reduction of bureaucracy by local government also needs state governments to loosen the reins and allow local government to say yes more often than not. Yep, great. I can see Kim nodding her head quite strongly there as well. Thank you. Certainly as somebody quite close to local government myself, planning, health, absolutely. Sometimes those are state issues. And we welcome your support and we should be able to ask for your support to be able to lobby for changes to those. But you've probably seen quite a few of that change, especially in WA, as a result of COVID and some of those things lately. All right.
Can I just comment on that statement? I think we've got to be very, very, very careful that we're not making excuses for the status quo. Now, I always believe you must act within your sphere of influence and not rely and start externalizing and say, we can't really do that until somebody else does something. We have proved with both the 7-Day Makeover and Business Boosters that there is an awful lot that local government can do to reduce red tape that is not reliant on state or federal governments loosening up. Now, yes, that would help further down the track, but there is a truckload of room for local government to change without any of that happening. Now, I'll just give one example. So I often find local government will say, oh, we're required by the state government to do neighbourhood development plans. And there's all sorts of plans that state government requires local government to do. That requirement doesn't tell you what those plans must look like. A plan may simply be that we are going to create a framework where the community and businesses are free to make over their town centre themselves. That's a plan. But local government interprets that instruction as, oh, we must say we're putting a flower pot here and we're going to have a certain type of park bench here. You understand? One is focuses on process, the other one focuses on the nitty gritty. And so you can always take a requirement. A requirement like you must have a neighbourhood plan or a town centre development plan, etc., doesn't tell you what that plan needs to look like. So even while that red tape is there, you can pervert it and twist it to your own ends. And we mustn't use that kind of thing as an excuse to say there's no room to move. It's all about being creative within what you've been handed. So for example, when we sit down and we do a what is allowed, if I say to a local council, for argument's sake, this happens a lot, I will say to them, would I be allowed to take all the bollards out in town? And because bollards are simply a no device that sits there all day saying, no, 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 I think they're terrible. If a council says to me, no, you can't take the bollards out, I don't fight them over that. But neither do I sit there paralysed going, oh, they've just stymied my great scheme for, how I could help revitalise this town centre. My reaction is, what can I creatively do with those bollards by leaving them there? So, for example, in a town called Penguin in Tasmania, we weren't allowed to take the bollards out. So what did we do? We turned every bollard into a penguin. So it's about being creative within the constraints that you've been given and not focusing on those constraints saying that stymied me. No, it just gave you a license to be more creative.
Absolutely. So the permission statements is a brilliant takeaway, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of questions and private conversations that continue from this. Was there any closing comments there from Chris? We should not need a permit to shake your thing, Northside Records.
No, I think we have an amazing opportunity with this pandemic. As everything is broken down, when we bring it all back, we have an amazing opportunity to regrow communities. And I think it's something we should go with with all guns blazing and all assistance out there to help bring communities back in. And it's just all before us for now. So let's go and do it. Party, I mean, you know that.